I woke up that morning with a heaviness I couldn't shake, the kind that sits in your chest, quiet but relentless. The world had already decided my story before I had a chance to speak. Headlines, whispers, and social media posts framed me as someone I wasn't, someone who had traded one identity for another. I stared at my reflection and felt a strange disconnect. The person looking back didn't feel foreign, but they felt exposed. Each rumor felt like a gust of wind trying to topple the foundation of everything I thought I knew about myself. The truth inside me felt smaller somehow, drowned in noise. They painted me with their assumptions, as if curiosity and respect could be mistaken for conversion. I hadn't changed my heart. I had simply opened it a little wider. I had listened, observed, and learned, but no one seemed to notice the difference between expansion and surrender. Everywhere I looked, eyes were judging, expecting a declaration I wasn't ready to give. Even close friends seemed unsure how to respond. I realized then that this was not about me, not entirely. It was about how fragile people's perceptions can be when confronted with something unfamiliar. In that moment, I felt a pull inward, a quiet urging to find clarity away from the chatter. I remembered the nights I had prayed alone, speaking to Allah about fears I had never admitted to anyone. Those prayers didn't need to be public to be true. I thought about the meaning of faith beyond labels. My belief wasn't measured by what others could see or what they wanted me to declare. It was measured by how I lived, how I treated others, and how I carried myself when no one was watching. Rumors can be intoxicating if you let them in. I felt the temptation to shout, to correct, to argue, but the louder I considered speaking, the more I realized that the truth I carry cannot be defined by anyone else's voice. Silence, paired with reflection, felt heavier and more honest than any statement I could issue. I began to see the difference between outward appearances and inward reality. People saw what they wanted to see, but I was living in a space between perception and truth. It was uncomfortable, yes, but it was also real. There was a richness in holding on to one's own understanding when the world seemed determined to rewrite it. The expansion I experienced was subtle but undeniable. My mind grew more patient. My heart grew more open. I discovered humility not in admitting change, but in recognizing that I didn't need the world's approval to hold my own convictions. I remembered times I had misjudged others, rushing to define them by a single action or word. Now I realized those same forces were at work against me. I felt empathy for the people who assumed the worst of me, even as I carried a quiet fire of self-awareness. There was fear, of course, fear of being misunderstood, of losing respect, of appearing weak. But that fear became a teacher, showing me where my attachment to approval still lingered. I began to see that my soul's peace wasn't in headlines, but in patience and understanding. At some point, I laughed quietly to myself, not out of amusement, but relief. The world could speculate endlessly, but my essence, my intentions remained intact. There was a freedom in knowing that faith and character could not be stolen or misrepresented. I thought of the countless times I had leaned on humor, on performance, on charm. Those tools had carried me through life, but they were not what defined me. My spirit, quiet and steadfast, was what mattered most. Unseen, uncelebrated, and yet completely alive. As the sun rose higher that day, I felt a sense of expansion, not from what I had gained, but from what I had allowed myself to experience inwardly, listening without judgment, holding curiosity without surrender, and respecting others without fear of misinterpretation. By the time I stepped into the day, the noise felt more distant. The desert of confusion was still there, but I had found an oasis within myself. I didn't need to correct the world. I didn't need to convert to be understood. I only needed to confront my own soul, and that, I realized, was the beginning of true growth. I had always believed that life moved in straight lines, that if I worked hard enough and spoke loudly enough, I could direct its course. Success felt like a map, and I held the compass. Each applause, each recognition seemed like proof that I was steering correctly, that I knew exactly who I was and what I represented. On stage, I felt untouchable. The jokes, the timing, the laughter, they were my instruments of control. I could read a room, guide its emotions, and leave them satisfied. It was intoxicating to believe that the world moved at my rhythm, that I could choreograph both perception and reality. But control is an illusion, one that dissolves in unexpected moments. I began to notice cracks in the carefully constructed armor of my persona. Rumors about my faith, small but persistent, began to spread, challenging the narrative I had so confidently presented to the world. Even the beliefs I had carried since childhood, the quiet prayers I learned from my mother, the gratitude whispered before meals, suddenly felt scrutinized. People projected assumptions onto me as if my private devotion were open for public debate. It was unsettling to realize that control was only ever partial. I remember a particular moment when I felt the weight of this illusion most sharply. I was walking through a crowded airport and someone recognized me. They didn't ask how I was or what I was working on. Instead, they mentioned the rumors, their eyes searching for confirmation. I had no answer that satisfied them, and for the first time, I felt truly powerless. It wasn't just public perception that unsettled me. I began to question my own assumptions about control. How much of my life had I really guided, and how much had simply unfolded under the guise of my planning? I realized that even my successes had their own momentum, independent of my will. The more I reflected, the more I understood how fragile identity can be. I had built myself around applause, laughter, and recognition. But those foundations shifted when the world reinterpreted my actions. Control was never about certainty. It was about the belief in certainty, and that belief was fragile. There were moments of frustration, of course. I wanted to push back, to explain, to assert dominance over the narrative. But each attempt only revealed how little influence I truly had over perception. I had learned that control is not the power to dictate what others think, but the discipline to govern one's own response. I started to focus inward, seeking stability in things no rumor could touch. Prayer, reflection, and quiet acts of integrity. In that inward gaze, I found a sense of authority I had never felt before, not over the world, but over myself. It was humbling, yet freeing. I thought about all the times I had laughed off criticism or dismissed doubt as irrelevant. Those defenses were only effective as long as I believed they mattered. When rumors challenged the core of my beliefs, they revealed how much of my confidence had been performative, dependent on approval rather than conviction. Control, I realized, was never about certainty or image. It was about surrender. Surrender to the reality that life unfolds according to its own laws, and that true strength comes from patience, humility, and faith in what I cannot command. In recognizing this, I began to let go of the need to manage every perception. I no longer measured my worth by whether people believed what I said or whether they understood my actions. The essence of control, I discovered, resided in owning my intentions and living authentically. Even as the world continued to speculate, I felt a quiet reassurance growing within me. The applause no longer dictated my identity, and the rumors no longer threatened my peace. I had learned that control over the soul is far more enduring than control over the image. This realization brought me closer to a deeper sense of faith. Understanding that I am not the ultimate arbiter of outcomes, that Allah guides the journey beyond my comprehension, allowed me to embrace uncertainty without fear. Control was no longer my burden, but my lesson. By letting go, I found a paradoxical stability. The less I tried to manipulate perception, the freer I became to explore truth, humility, and compassion. My stage had expanded, not in size or fame, but in depth. A space where my soul could navigate life with sincerity, regardless of the noise around me. I felt the first pangs of the crisis like a chill in the spine, sudden and uninvited. It wasn't a scandal, not the kind that splashes across newspapers and shakes careers. It was quieter, more insidious, a theft of narrative, a claim that my inner life belonged to someone else. I remembered walking through an unfamiliar city, feeling awe at the architecture of a mosque, at the rhythm of devotion, at the beauty in another's faith. I spoke with respect, not to perform, not to impress, but simply because humanity and reverence demanded it. That simple gesture became fuel for assumptions. By the time I returned home, the world had already spun a story I never authored. Social media buzzed with declarations, questions, and speculation. They said I had converted, that my faith had shifted completely. None of it was true, yet it weighed heavily on me. I didn't feel anger at first, I felt confusion. How had a personal experience, an act of respect, become a global headline? How could admiration or curiosity be twisted into something I had never intended? It was disorienting, like watching a shadow move independently from my own. Friends reached out, unsure how to respond. Some urged me to clarify, to make a statement that would satisfy the crowd. But even in their advice, I sensed the danger of ceding control over what only my heart could claim. Speaking loudly would not reclaim the narrative, it would only feed the frenzy. The sting of being labeled came from more than misrepresentation. It came from the sense that my sincerity had been questioned. People assumed motives, interpreted respect as conversion, and disregarded the deeper intention behind my actions. That misunderstanding cut deeper than any insult. I remember the nights I lay awake, turning the situation over in my mind. I replayed the moments in the mosque, the words I had exchanged, the gestures I had made. Everything felt authentic, yet every authentic detail seemed insufficient to convince anyone of the truth. It was in those moments that I realized the world does not always need accuracy. The world thrives on stories it can digest quickly, on labels it can latch onto, on certainty over nuance. My truth, quiet and measured, was lost in the hunger for spectacle. I began to feel an unexpected vulnerability, a fragility I had not known before. For all my success, my fame, my carefully cultivated persona, I could not control how people perceived my soul. The illusion of mastery over image crumbled entirely in the face of public speculation. Yet amid that vulnerability, a subtle awakening began. I understood that my integrity did not require validation from strangers. My intention, my respect, and my curiosity were enough to guide my actions, even if misunderstood by the masses. I felt the tension between ego and authenticity, between the desire to correct and the need to remain grounded. Every impulse to defend myself threatened to tether me to the very noise I sought to rise above. I had to choose patience over reaction, wisdom over instinct. I reflected on the countless times I had judged others prematurely, labeling their actions or motives without understanding. Now the same forces had circled back to me. It was humbling, and it reminded me that life has a way of teaching through mirrored experience. In the quiet of my reflection, I began to shift my focus inward. I could not control headlines or tweets, but I could control my response, my intentions, and my connection to what truly mattered. That realization was small, but it carried immense weight. Slowly, the sting lessened, replaced by a quiet clarity. Respecting others, showing curiosity, and honoring different paths did not diminish my own. Misinterpretation did not erode sincerity. The crisis was not a defeat, but a test of patience, humility, and faith. By the time I emerged from that period, I carried a lesson that fame could never teach. Life's breaking points do not always arrive with noise and collapse. Sometimes they arrive quietly, asking only that we remain steadfast in truth, integrity, and inner submission. The storm of voices was relentless, a torrent of assumptions, opinions, and judgments that threatened to drown me. Yet in the midst of that chaos, I felt a quiet nudge within my heart, a reminder that there is a wisdom far beyond human perception. Allah sees the unseen, knows the intention behind every act, and measures the heart where no eye can reach. I began to understand that the labels people assign are fleeting and shallow. They cling to what they can see, what they can read, what they can repeat. But my heart, my intentions, and my sincerity cannot be captured in a headline or a tweet. That realization brought an unexpected calm. Islam teaches that the heart's journey is known only to Allah. And in that truth, I found comfort. I didn't need the world's approval or understanding. My actions, guided by honesty and respect, were sufficient in the sight of the one who truly matters. I thought about the moments I had admired others' faith or culture, the conversations where I listened more than I spoke. I realized that honoring the goodness in others does not require abandoning oneself. Respect is not surrender, and admiration is not conversion. There is a profound freedom in recognizing that faith cannot be forced or fabricated. Islam reminds us that there is no compulsion in belief, no requirement to perform for others' validation. This truth settled in me like a soft rain, cleansing the weight of misinterpretation. I reflected on the idea of humility in Islam, that true humility is not merely lowering oneself, but expanding one's heart to encompass understanding, compassion, and justice. In that light, the rumors and assumptions around me became less threatening. They were no longer tests of ego, but opportunities for inner growth. Tawakkul, the trust in Allah, emerged as a guiding principle. I realized that when people project narratives onto me, when the world mislabels intentions, it is not my responsibility to control their perception. My responsibility is to act with integrity and leave the outcomes to Allah. I remembered times in life when I had felt the illusion of control, when I thought I could shape every reaction and every outcome. In comparison, this surrender to divine wisdom felt liberating, a release of the chains I had unknowingly carried. Reflection showed me that honoring another's truth does not diminish my own. It expands the heart, deepens understanding, and cultivates empathy. I could respect the practices, beliefs, and perspectives of others without compromising my own faith or identity. I began to view the storm of opinions as a mirror, reflecting not just misunderstanding from the outside, but also lessons within. Patience, clarity, and trust in divine guidance became the tools I needed to navigate the turbulence. The more I embraced this perspective, the less fear and defensiveness I felt. I realized that misinterpretation is inevitable, but integrity is inviolable. When I act with sincerity, the world's labels hold no power over my peace. In these quiet moments of awakening, I felt a subtle but profound expansion of heart. The heart is not confined by misunderstanding, by rumor, or by the limits of public perception. It grows with patience, trust, and a willingness to see goodness where others might not. I recalled the countless examples in my life where respect and compassion had yielded unexpected blessings. Listening without judgment, acting without expectation, and trusting in Allah had always guided me through trials, and now it guided me through misunderstanding. This awakening also brought clarity. My faith journey is personal, yet deeply connected to the universal principles of justice, compassion, and humility. Every step of respect and understanding becomes an act of devotion, a reflection of the mercy and wisdom of Allah. By the end of this period, I realized that expansion of the heart is itself a spiritual awakening. True freedom comes not from controlling perception or defending identity, but from surrendering to divine wisdom, honoring others without compromise, and trusting that Allah alone knows the truth of our hearts. I realized that every argument, every denial, every attempt to correct the world only fueled the noise. Fighting back with words felt like pouring water into a storm. It never settled anything. I needed to turn inward, to seek guidance from a source that cannot be misrepresented, misunderstood, or swayed by headlines. I asked myself quietly what Allah truly desired from me in this moment. Was I reacting out of pride, clinging to my ego, or was I seeking honest alignment with my principles? That question lingered, echoing in the corners of my mind until it became a compass. The weight of Sabr began to settle on me, heavy but comforting. Patience against misunderstanding, patience against insult, patience against assumptions. It was a discipline I had never fully practiced in such a public way. And yet, in that weight, I felt a strange lightness. I recognize that submission is not passive. It is an active choice to place trust in Allah's wisdom, even when the world's gaze is piercing and misinformed. True strength is not in defending yourself to everyone, but in aligning your actions with integrity and letting go of the need for validation. For the first time, I could see that I didn't have to renounce my identity to honor and respect another tradition. Respect and reverence for others are not threats to my own faith. They are expressions of the humility and compassion that Allah teaches. Each moment of reflection reminded me that words spoken in haste rarely carry the weight of truth. Silence, tempered with patience and sincerity, often communicates far more than forceful defense. I began to speak less to prove and more to act with clarity in my convictions. I felt a subtle shift inside me, a transformation that was invisible to everyone else. My heart no longer contracted at every rumor or misrepresentation. Instead, it expanded with understanding, allowing space for others' perspectives without compromising my own path. Humility became a shield rather than a weakness. I realized that acknowledging the limits of my control did not diminish my power. It deepened it. Submission to Allah's wisdom meant I could respond to life with gentleness, not defensiveness, and with compassion, not pride. I remembered past moments when I had reacted out of fear or ego, when the world's judgment had felt unbearable. In contrast, this surrender felt like walking through a door I hadn't known was there, leading to a place of calm I had never experienced before. Compassion in speech became natural. I no longer felt compelled to confront every false assumption. Instead, I listened, understood, and chose words that reflected my integrity rather than my irritation. My message shifted from reaction to reflection, from defense to demonstration of truth. I recognize that clarity and conviction does not need loud announcement. It is quiet, consistent, and lived through daily actions. My faith, my respect for others, and my integrity became visible in the choices I made, not in the defenses I offered. Every interaction became a practice in submission. Even when challenged, I sought to respond with honesty, patience, and gentleness. Each small act of humility strengthened my inner resolve and reminded me that control is not mine, but guidance and intention are. I began to see the rumors and misunderstandings not as threats, but as lessons, opportunities to deepen patience, to exercise discernment, and to trust Allah's timing over the immediacy of public opinion. Each challenge became a step toward inner clarity. By embracing this perspective, I found that the world's noise no longer dictated my peace. Submission to Allah's will, patience in the face of misunderstanding, and compassion in speech allowed me to reclaim the narrative within myself without needing the world to acknowledge it. By the end of that journey, I realized that inner transformation does not come from controlling perception, but from controlling the heart. Surrender, patience, humility, and compassion became the pillars of my response, and in them, I found a serenity that no rumor, headline, or assumption could ever take away. Sitting in quiet now, I feel the weight of everything I've lived through, not as burden, but as a teacher. Life's lessons are rarely loud or spectacular. They arrive softly in moments of reflection when the heart finally listens. I've come to understand that true growth isn't about outward labels or what others believe about me. It's about the depth of my connection with Allah, the sincerity in my prayers, and the integrity with which I live each day. Every action, every choice becomes a thread in a tapestry of faith and purpose. Nothing else, not headlines, not assumptions, can define that. I've learned that honoring others does not dilute my own truth. Respect and compassion are not concessions, but reflections of a heart aligned with divine guidance. Each person we encounter carries their own journey, and acknowledging that is itself an act of wisdom. The world loves to categorize and label, but the soul does not fit neatly into boxes. It resists confinement, grows quietly, and expands in ways invisible to the eye. My peace came when I stopped trying to conform to expectations and started embracing authenticity. Humility became my anchor. I no longer felt the need to justify my actions or explain my intentions to a world eager for certainty. Quiet reflection, sincere practice, and a commitment to integrity allowed me to reclaim my own story. I understood that patience is not weakness, but strength. To navigate misinterpretation, to endure judgment without losing composure, is to embody faith in its truest form. Sabr taught me that peace is found not in controlling perception, but in controlling the heart. Every step I take now carries a sense of purpose beyond recognition or applause. I walk with the awareness that Allah's wisdom surpasses human understanding and that aligning my actions with His guidance is the truest measure of success. I see that the heart's expansion is ongoing. Each day offers another opportunity to practice compassion, to forgive silently, to act with honesty, and to reflect mercy even when misunderstood. Growth is quiet, cumulative, and deeply personal. Looking back, the rumors, the misinterpretations, the assumptions, they were all lessons disguised as trials. They pushed me to examine my intentions, deepen my humility, and surrender with sincerity. In that surrender, I discovered freedom. Now, in this quiet, I carry a simple truth. Life is not about changing labels or conforming to others' expectations. It is about deepening our bond with the Creator, walking with integrity, honoring humanity, and allowing the soul to expand in wisdom, patience, and mercy at every step.